Speak and tell us, our Jimena, looking northward far away, o'er the camp of the invaders, o'er the Mexican array. Who is losing? Who is winning? Are they far or come they near? Look abroad and tell us, sister, whither rolls the storm we hear. Down the hills of Angostura, still the storm of battle rolls. Blood is flowing, men are dying. God have mercy on their souls. Who is losing? Who is winning? Over hill and over plain, I see but smoke of cannon clouding through the mountain rain. Holy Mother, keep our brothers. Look, Jimena, look once more. Still I see the fearful whirlwind rolling darkly as before, bearing on in strange confusion, friend and foeman, foot and horse, like some wild and troubled torrent sweeping down its mountain course. Rolling fast and frightful on. Speak, Jimena, speak and tell us, who has lost and who has won? Alas, alas, I know not. Friend and foe together fall. O'er the dying rush the living. Pray, my sisters, for them all. Lo, the wind, the smoke is lifting. Blessed Mother, save my brain. I can see the wounded crawling slowly out from heaps of slain. Now they stagger, blind and bleeding. Now they fall and strive to rise. Hasten, sisters, haste and save them, lest they die before our eyes. Look forth once more, Jimena. Like a cloud before the wind, rolls a battle down the mountains, leaving blood and death behind. Ah, they plead in vain for mercy. In the dust the wounded strive. Hide your faces, holy angels. Oh, thou Christ of God, forgive. Let the cool gray shadows fall. Dying brothers, fighting demons, drop thy curtain over all. Through the thickening winter twilight, wide apart the battle rolled. In its sheath the saber rested, and the cannon's lips grew cold. Speak and tell us, our Jimena, looking northward far away, o'er the camp of the invaders, o'er the Mexican array. Who is losing? Who is winning? Are they far or come they near? Look abroad and tell us, sister, whither rolls the storm we hear. Down the hills of Angostura, still the storm of battle rolls. Blood is flowing, men are dying. God have mercy on their souls. Who is losing? Who is winning? Over hill and over plain, I see but smoke of cannon clouding through the mountain rain. Keep our brothers. Look, Jimena, look once more. Still I see the fearful whirlwind rolling darkly as before, bearing on in strange confusion, friend and foeman, foot and horse, like some wild and troubled torrent sweeping down its mountain course. Nearer came the storm and nearer, rolling fast and frightful on. Speak, Jimena, speak and tell us, who has lost and who has won? Alas, alas, I know not. Friend and foe together fall. O'er the dying rush the living. Pray, my sisters, for them all. Lo, the wind, the smoke is lifting. Blessed Mother, save my brain. I can see the wounded crawling slowly out from heaps of slain. Now they stagger, blind and bleeding. Now they fall and strive to rise. Hasten, sisters, haste and save them, lest they die before our eyes. Look forth once more, Jimena. Like a cloud before the wind, rolls a battle down the mountains, leaving blood and death behind. Ah, they plead in vain for mercy. In the dust the wounded strive. Hide your faces, holy angels. Oh, thou Christ of God, forgive. Let the cool gray shadows fall. Dying brothers, fighting demons, drop thy curtain over all. Through the thickening winter twilight, wide apart the battle rolled. In its sheath the saber rested, and the cannon's lips grew cold. And tell us, our Jimena, looking northward far away, o'er the camp of the invaders, o'er the Mexican array. Who is losing? Who is winning? Are they far or come they near? Look abroad and tell us, sister, whither rolls the storm we hear. Down the hills of Angostura, still the storm of battle rolls. Blood is flowing, men are dying. God have mercy on their souls. Who is losing? Who is winning? Over hill and over plain, I see but smoke of cannon clouding through the mountain rain. Keep our brothers. Look, Jimena, look once more. Still I see the fearful whirlwind rolling darkly as before, bearing on in strange confusion, friend and foeman, foot and horse, like some wild and troubled torrent sweeping down its mountain course. Rolling fast and frightful on. Speak, Jimena, speak and tell us, who has lost and who has won? Alas, alas, I know not. Friend and foe together fall. O'er the dying rush the living. Pray, my sisters, for them all. Lo, the wind, the smoke is lifting. Blessed Mother, save my brain. I can see the wounded crawling slowly out from heaps of slain.
evening. I'm Donna Wares, editor of the LA Times Book Club. This month, we've all been reading A Ballad of Love and Glory by Reyna Grande. It's set during the Mexican-American War, a war the U.S. cannot remember and that Mexico cannot forget. Reyna is a California writer who made headlines in 2012 with The Distance Between Us, her best-selling memoir about a childhood torn between Mexico and California. Her new book is a historical novel and a love story that transports us to the Rio Grande in 1846. Inspired by true events, the story revolves around a Mexican nurse who loses her home and everyone she loves, and an Irish immigrant who deserts the U.S. Army to fight with Mexico and lead the St. Patrick's Battalion. Reyna Grande spent 7 years researching A Ballad of Love and Glory, and tonight she'll be in conversation with my colleague, Steve Padilla. Please join me in welcoming them both to the LA Times Book Club's virtual stage. Good evening. How are you both doing?
Good, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Reyna. We're really thrilled to have you. And, you know, I was so interested when you talked about recently to us about the idea that this was a book that you never planned to write. Why is that?
I never saw myself as a writer who could write a war story, who could write battle scenes and about soldiers and military life and politics. This book was a total departure from all my other work.
Well, we're so excited to hear more about that when you chat with Steve. And I want to just welcome you back, Steve. We started talking about this book before it was even out, and you already had a special interest in the subject before you even read it. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, when you mentioned it was set in the U.S., in the war between Mexico and the U.S., one of the first things I thought was, well, I hope she mentions St. Patrick's Battalion, not realizing that that was the spine of the book, the heart of the book, is as they say down there, the Batallón de San Patricio. So it was a delight to read this.
Well, that's great. And I want to thank all of our readers for joining us this evening. And we've also had quite a few questions that have come in during the month while people are reading and enjoying the book and sharing their comments. So we'll share some of those questions a little later. I wanted to, first of all, thank, we always have an independent book-selling partner. And tonight, our partner is Page's Bookstore in Manhattan Beach. And thank you, Reyna, for signing all of those book plates. So we still have autographed copies available, and people have been ordering them all month long, which is really wonderful. And, you know, at this point, I'm going to just turn the conversation over to Steve, and I look forward to coming back and rejoining you both a little later. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Donna. And welcome, Reyna. Finally good to see you. We swapped some emails, you know.
Yeah, so good to meet you.
Yeah, one of the things I like to do is collect comments from writers about writing. And what I want to do tonight is run a few past you to get your reaction, to see how they might reflect or don't reflect your own journey as a writer. And the first quote I want to run past you is from someone you know, Sandra Cisneros. And this is what she said. I always tell people that I became a writer not because I went to school, but because my mother took me to the library. I wanted to become a writer so I could see my name in the card catalog. So,
yeah.
Well, what do you think of that? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I love that sentiment because I also spent a lot of time at the public library. Although my parents did not take me, I had to take myself. And I became a writer because I wanted to see my experiences as an immigrant reflected in the stories that I was writing.
Did you find that those experiences weren't reflected in what you found at the library? Was there a disconnect?
Yeah, I was reading Sweet Valley High, so there were no undocumented Mexican immigrants in those books.
I see. Well, what kind of reader were you as a kid? I mean, were you comic books or novels, adventure? What kind of reader did you gravitate to anything in particular?
Well, at first I started with picture books because my English was not very good. So I
Mhm.
could understand the pictures more than the words. But then after I started reading more like young adult fiction, and then I moved on to thicker books like Stephen King. I read a lot of his novels. I read Agatha Christie. And then I discovered the romance section of the public library. So I read a lot of romance books with Fabio on the cover.
Oh,
So
really?
my reading was not very sophisticated when I was young.
Well, does that matter? I mean, isn't just reading,
Yeah,
in
I
many
mean,
respects?
it helped me to fall in love with stories.
Yeah. By the way, I wasn't planning on running this quote by you, but one of my favorite, another quote from Writers on Writing is from Agatha Christie, who said, let's see if I get this right. The best place to plan a book is while, she said, the best time to plan a book is while doing the dishes. Can you
Yeah,
relate? I
well,
can actually relate to that. Can you
oh,
figure
could
that out?
you? Yeah, I could relate to that too. Although I think the time when I plan my books is when I'm gardening, when I'm digging my hands into the soil and planting or pruning. That's the time when I feel very creative.
Now, why is that? Because you're not trying to write, you're just thinking, or is it the interaction with the plants? I mean, what is it?
I think it's the interaction with the plants because, when I plant seeds, I know that something is gonna grow from that. So the whole process of being able to watch a seed turn into a plant, that's kind of like with writing, you put one
Mhm.
one word at a time on the page and it eventually becomes a novel. Or also the pruning. I love pruning in my garden. Every time I'm stressed out, I just grab my pruners and I go at it. And I like that because it helps me when I come back to my novel or whatever book I'm working on. It helps me to see what I need to prune from that as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah. Let me run another quote by you. This one from Annie Proulx. She, of course, gave us the shipping news and Brokeback Mountain. And she's talking about how writing is taught. What I find to be very bad advice is the snappy little sentence, write what you know. It is the
Mm.
most tiresome and stupid advice that could possibly be given. If we write simply what we know, we never grow.
Mm.
And I'm curious to hear your reaction because you've now worked both in fiction as well as memoir. So what do you think of her comment?
I was guilty of that. I was guilty of buying into that idea that you should write what you know. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of what I did with my earlier work. But I'm going to say that with the Ballad of Love and Glory, it really helped me to understand how I can write about what I don't know, and it would teach me a lot, the whole process of discovering what I don't know. So I'm actually going to start using that as my writing philosophy.
I see. I see. Well, you were already familiar with the U.S. and the war between Mexico and the U.S., but as I understand it, you weren't familiar with St. Patrick's Battalion, and you learned about it kind of by chance. Could you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wasn't that familiar with the Mexican American War. I heard about it when I took a history of Mexico class in college. And that was my first time kind of hearing, that there was this conflict between US and Mexico, and that Mexico had lost its northern territories to the US. But I didn't know more than that. I didn't know how it happened, why it happened, and also I didn't ponder too deeply on the aftermath of the war. So then in 2013, when somebody at my book reading approached me and asked me, "Oh, have you ever heard of the St. Patrick's Battalion?" That was when I kind of fell into this
Um,
history by reading over 100 books about it and learning everything I could in order
mm,
to write this book.
wow. And the leader, and he's really one of the two principal characters of your book is John Riley. Can you tell us about the learning about him and how he grew as a character for you?
Yeah, so John Riley, what I found out about him was just, that he was an Irish immigrant from County Galway who had come to the United States. And eventually he enlisted in the US Army in September of 1845. And then he came down with Taylor's troops to the Rio Grande. And in April 12 of 1846, he deserted and he joined the Mexican ranks as a first lieutenant. And then from there, he went up in rank. And I knew, what battles he had fought in. I knew what happened to him and his men, but there was so much there that we didn't know, that we don't know about John Riley, and that gave me the opportunity to then, for me to try to see the world through his eyes and to try to
Did,
understand why he did what he did.
well, did you find that you related to him as an immigrant? Because one
Oh,
of the things he talks about, and you explore heavily, is he had been in the British military and felt being a bit of a traitor to his people in Ireland because of that. And then he comes to the States. And in the book, you detail how, and I think it's a good reminder for people, just how mistreated Irish immigrants were at one point in this country. It was pretty awful treatment. So
yeah.
did you relate to that?
I definitely did, and that was actually a big surprise for me because I I didn't know I was gonna write another immigrant story. I thought that I
Oh,
was
okay.
taking up. I thought like, oh, I'm gonna explore something different this time, and yet it became an immigrant story because I ended up writing about an Irish immigrant, and I discovered how much I had in common with him, even though he immigrated in the 1840s and I immigrated in the 1980s. And yet, the Irish immigrants in the 19th century were so demonized and reviled and mistreated and suffer so much discrimination, much in the way that Latino immigrants suffer today. So I gave him my immigrant trauma and my drama, and
I
it
see.
helped me to and being
Well,
an immigrant, I feel that it really helped me to understand why he threw himself into the Rio Grande and went to Mexico to try to find what he couldn't find in the United States.
well, you point. I wonder, without giving too much away in the novel, if you could explain to listeners tonight about what were the main reasons that drove these Irish immigrants to technically desert the U.S. Army and go fight for Mexico.
Yeah. Well, obviously, at least for my understanding, is all the discrimination that they experienced in the U.S. military, and also Catholicism played a big
Mhm.
role in their decision to desert, because some of them, just couldn't stand the thought of going into a Catholic country to invade it and to dispossess Mexico of its lands. The other thing that I felt they could relate to, especially the Irish, was that the Irish had experienced oppression by an Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation. They had experienced an invasion, losing their lands, and so they felt that Mexico might face the same fate, and they didn't want Mexicans to experience what the Irish had experienced in their own homeland at the hands of the English.
Exactly. By the way, did you? This may be a weird question. Did you have more fun writing the Irish characters than the Mexican characters?
I did have a lot of fun, and it was I worked so hard
And
on
I,
it
by the, and
because
I'm gonna interrupt and just say I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean the Mexican characters leap off the page. It's not like they're not developed, but I just got the sense that you were having a quite the time putting on your Irish, so to speak. I just that comes through
yeah.
somehow.
Right. Yeah. Well, what happened was I was so worried about not doing it right. Doing a
Mhm.
disservice to the Irish people by not capturing their experience in an authentic way. And so I spent a lot of time and energy working on my Irish characters, on capturing their language, understanding their culture and their history. And I remember I showed the manuscript to a friend of mine who read it. And then she said, Reyna, your Irishmen sound more Irish than your Mexicans sound Mexican.
Oh goodness. So how did you respond to that critique?
It was true. It was true. I had spent a lot of time on my Irish character. So then I went back to page one, and then I started working on my Mexican characters, on Jimena, making sure that I did capture her voice, and I confess that I assumed, because I'm a Mexican woman, I would be able to capture the voice of a Mexican woman, but I discovered that I needed to put more work into that.
Yeah, we should explain that Jimena is the other main protagonist of this tale, along with John Riley. Anyway, I find that quite fascinating. By the way, I wonder if I could impose upon the folks who are doing the camera if they could have a wide shot, because you have something next to you in the background that I hope you could show people and explain. There's this. I know what it is. There's this banner. Could you tell people about that? It's
Yeah.
just over your shoulder there. Yeah.
So this is my banner of the San Patricios. Obviously, it's just a representation of it. It's not what it really looked like, but I wanted to have it here with me for support, moral support.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay, excellent. And I just got a note here saying that my battery is running low, so I'm a little worried about something. So I'm going to plug something in just to make sure we don't have a disaster here. So pardon me, folks, everybody. And okay. So yeah, I think we're going to run into a technical problem. So Reyna, while I take care of that, I wonder if you could explain to people. We've shown a photo showing a statue of John Riley, or a statue. Could you explain to people what that is while I solve this one technical problem? And sorry, guys, I got to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the statue of John Riley is in Mexico City, in the Plaza San Jacinto, which is where some of the San Patricios were hanged, and John Riley received his punishment of a public flogging and being branded on the cheeks. So it's a bust of John Riley. Obviously, we don't know exactly what he looked like, but this is a representation of John Riley at this plaza. And for me, visiting the plaza was just really emotional, just knowing what had happened there, thinking about the members of the St. Patrick's Battalion who lost their lives, thinking about John Riley, and the trauma that happened in this particular spot is something that I felt very deeply. In addition to the bust of John Riley, there's also a plaque on the wall listing the names of the 50 San Patricios who were hanged at the gallows. And in this plaza, every September, there is a parade that is held in the honor of the San Patricios. So if you go to Mexico City in September, sometimes there will be a parade there at that particular plaza. And I think it's just a really beautiful way to honor and to remember the Irish heroes of Mexico.
Great. I'm wondering, can you hear? I'm wondering if we have a technical problem. Can you hear me, folks? I'm not hearing. You can hear me. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And again, sorry, Reyna, for the difficulty here. One of the things about the book is packed with action. You say you had never written battle scenes, but you pull it off beautifully, rather gruesomely, actually. So here's the thing: there's so much action. I think people might forget that the title is A Ballad of Love and Glory. Along with the glory, there is a lot of love, a very powerful love. I was hoping you could talk about the love story aspect of the book.
Yeah. So I discovered that I was actually writing a love story when, after I started doing my research on John Riley, I learned that there was a rumor that the real John Riley had fallen in love with a Mexican widow, and that he may or may not have stayed in Mexico to make a life with this widow. At the same time that I learned about the rumor, I also found The Angels of Buena Vista, the poem written by John Greenleaf Whittier, which is a poem about a Mexican woman named Jimena who's out in the battlefield tending to the wounded. So I kind of put those two things together and I realized, like, here's my female protagonist, Jimena, who somehow ends up in this battlefield on the front lines of this war. And she's going to be that Mexican widow that stole John Riley's heart. So that's how the story then became the story of love between John Riley and Jimena, and how they help each other survive this invasion of Jimena's country.
Yeah. By the way, one of the real compelling characters is her grandmother, who is a curandera. She's a healer using, medicinal, medicinal plants to heal people. I just have to ask, was that something you had to research and learn, or is there a curandera in your family that you that you picked this stuff up from? I mean, or maybe a combination of both.
Well, it's a combination of both, because there is a curandera in my family, and that was my grandmother. My maternal grandmother, Jacinta Benitez Catalan, was a curandera. But I only lived with my grandmother up until I was 9.5. And then my father came back to Mexico and brought me to Los Angeles. So I kind of lost my relationship with my grandmother because I hardly ever saw her after I immigrated. So I imagine that if I had stayed in Mexico, she might have trained me as a curandera as well, or at least taught me more about curanderismo. And I didn't learn that. So then when I was writing Jimena, I gave her my grandmother. And I gave her what I wish my grandmother had given me, which is that training and that gift of healing. And every time I wrote scenes between Jimena and Ana Hortensia, it broke my heart, because I could hear my grandma talking to me and teaching me those things.
Oh, that's sweet. Oh my gosh. Well, now to something less sweet. One of the fascinating things about your novel is how it blends in real historical figures, some who are really not very nice. Among them was the future Confederate General Braxton Bragg, who I didn't like before the novel, and I like even less now, by the way. And the Mexican general and on again, off again president, the leader, Antonio Lopez de Santana. Could you tell us about the research into this book, and I guess maybe in particular those two characters and how you develop them?
Yeah, well, as I was doing my research, I learned a lot about Bragg and his bad reputation as a nativist, and all the mistreatment and abuse that he would inflict upon the immigrant soldiers in the U.S. Army. And he did that not just during the Mexican American War, but also during the Civil War. He had a bad reputation. So I decided that, Riley, the real John Riley, might have crossed paths with him, and he might have witnessed Bragg doing horrible things to his countrymen. So he became very prominent as a antagonist to Riley, and I wanted to show through Bragg what some of the other officers were like, especially the West Pointers who would would mistreat the privates in their ranks.
One supreme irony, is Bragg. He is denouncing the Irish for betraying the United States, and yet he fights for the Confederacy. A few years down the road.
That is ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, So who's the traitor?
Right.
What about the Generalissimo, Antonio Lopez Santana? He was a much larger character in the book than I expected, and rather complex. I wonder if you could I'm wondering how much of that is you and how much of that is the historical record. I'm just intrigued here.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that I was really intimidated going into this because I was worried about if how I was gonna be able to bring him to life on the page. You know, this is a
Mm.
guy who's like bigger than life. He's the most hated man in Mexico and in Texas too. And I have never really liked the way he's been portrayed in movies or even other books as a one-dimensional villain, and I wanted to explore his complexity. You know, I wanted to give him all his contradictions. And so I read a lot of biographies about Santana. I read his memoirs as well. And the things that stood out for me was how everybody talked about how charismatic he was,
Mm.
and how, you know, even though he did all these horrible things, sometimes you just couldn't help liking him because he was very charming, very charismatic, and he had mood swings as well. So then I
Mhm.
kind of took those descriptions of Santana, and that's how he became in my head. That's how I saw him, and that's how I heard him as well. So when I started writing his scenes, I didn't have to work too hard to bring him to life. He just kind of took over my scenes, and then I couldn't get him to stop talking. He talks so much.
He leaps off the page, and also just to refresh the memories of our readers, he was one of those in command at the Alamo, and so in I guess a lot of you know Alamo movies, he's portrayed as that demon, and he did indeed do some
Mhm.
awful things, particularly afterwards.
Right.
But no, but he leaps off. It's interesting to me about what you were concerned about because those characters are so vibrant, you know. But that's
Ye-
what writing is. It's
Oh,
work.
thank you. Thank you. I got very lucky with him because I don't know why I was able to connect so deeply with him. And I felt every time I had, you know, he was in the room with Jimena, I always felt so much tension there between the two of them. They were always butting heads. And of course he would get on her nerves with his egotism, and like he just has this huge ego, and she couldn't stand him, but she could go toe to toe with him, you know, and I
Yeah.
kind of
I,
like
I
that.
I don't think it'll ruin anything for readers to say why she has scenes with Santana. She's a healer, and he had suffered a pretty awful injury in war. You maybe want to tell them what that was about, our
Yeah,
readers,
well,
listeners.
during the pastry war in the 1830s, the French invaded Mexico, and Santana fought against the French, and he lost his leg during the French fired a cannon and killed his horse and mutilated his leg. So the surgeons who amputated his limb did a really terrible job, and they left a little bit of the bone exposed so that he had excruciating pain when he walked. And so his injury would constantly, you know, get infected. So because Jimena is a healer, I in the novel, she becomes his personal nurse against her will, and she
Mhm.
ends up getting to know him very well and having a lot of interaction with him. And and to me, like, that was really important because they have a history in a way, right? With Jimena
Yeah.
being from Texas, she witnessed the Battle of the Alamo. She saw how Mexican Texans were abused and mistreated and physically harmed after what happened in Texas. That, you know, Santana killed so many people in Texas, and she had experienced what happened, the aftermath of those massacres. So she definitely had a lot of things that she needed to deal with while she was interacting with Santa Ana. But I
Right. Well,
thought that,
there's some of the book's more vibrant scenes when those two are interacting.
thank you.
Um, hey, so recently you shared with Donna and with me two wonderful pieces of music.
Mm,
And one, people who maybe tuned in just before the program officially started could hear that being played. First time I think a penny whistle has joined mariachi trumpets, by the way. One is an actual ballad that you commissioned about John and Jimena, and we're going to hear a little snippets of both of those pieces right now.
I was born a son of Erin with no Irish luck or rank, forced away from County Galway to the Rio Grande banks. There I hoped to prove my mettle.
Speak and tell us, our Jimena, looking northward far away, o'er the camp of the invaders, o'er the Mexican array. Who is losing? Who is winning? Are they far or come they near? Look abroad and tell us, sister, whither rolls the storm we hear.
Love this. So tell us, how did these come about? What's the story behind these two pieces?
Well, they came about because I realized that the title of my book was A Ballad of Love and Glory. And I thought, maybe I should have a ballad that goes with that novel. So then I was very fortunate. My friend Yareli Arismendi, who does the audiobook and who also does the performance of the poem you just heard, The Angels of Buena Vista, I asked her if she knew a musician that might be able to help me with this ballad. So she put me in touch with Germán Briseño, who lives in Los Angeles, and he's originally from Mexico. And we started working on this ballad, and I really loved the way it turned out. And we worked together on the lyrics, and of course he composed the music for it. And I really love how, it's a blend of like Mexican music with Irish music, Celtic music. So there's this fusion of both the Mexican and the Irish culture, which I feel really represents my novel as well. So I really love how it turned out.
Yeah. Is there, now we just had time to play just some snippets. Is it where can people hear this somewhere, or on YouTube or something? What can they do?
Yeah. I actually I've uploaded it to YouTube, so you could listen to it as many times as you like.
Yeah. Who are the singers? There's the duet. There's the guy singing. There's the Jimena and there's John. Can you tell us who those are? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So Germán Briseño, who did the music and the lyrics, he also is singing the song. So he's the male singer who's doing John Riley's part, and then his friend, she goes by Shelley as her artist name. She performed Jimena's part.
I see. Okay. I'm going to switch gears here. Let's see. Your previous books include two memoirs about your experiences growing up, basically in California and in Mexico. When you're visiting the library, and I don't know, maybe even then, thinking you might be a writer someday. I'm assuming that we have some aspiring authors watching tonight. So, any advice you can give them? What should they know?
Well, I mean, there's different things to being a writer. First, you have to be a reader to be a writer. So make sure that you are making time to read, and also read as many different genres as you can, and also not just books, but you should be reading screenplays, for example. I think that helps a lot with dialogue. You should also read craft books. I have always found craft books very informative and helps me to look at my writing in a different way. And of course, you should be writing too. I'm not the kind of writer that writes every day. I know there are many writers who do, but as long as you're prioritizing your writing, where you set a goal for yourself, whether it's a daily goal or a weekly goal or a monthly goal, but make sure that you do have a writing goal that you're working towards. And then the last part that I would advise is that you learn as much as you can about the publishing business, because sometimes we make the mistake of only focusing on the craft, but writing is a business as well. The publishing industry, you need to learn as much as you can about it to be able to have a shot at actually having a lasting career as a writer.
Well, how does one do that? How does one learn about the publishing? I mean, I know words and sentences, but I don't know the publishing industry. How do you go about that?
I mean, you could read books about it. You could read a lot of articles. I mean, we have the internet. There's so much information at our fingertips. You could just Google it, and there it is. There's so many different articles about things that you should know about the publishing industry, about how to look for an agent, how to pitch an editor, how to promote yourself and your work. Um, you could go to conferences as well, make sure that you're going to like writers conferences, book festivals, where there's a lot of writers, agents, and editors there. So make sure that you are doing what you can to network and to put yourself in those places where other people in the publishing industry are to be found.
I see. I see. I'm going to run another quote by an author past you, but first I
Okay.
want to ask something I should have asked earlier when we were talking about what kind of reader you were as a kid. When I failed to ask. So when did you start writing? Were you writing stories at age 5, or not till high school, college? I mean, when did you actually start feeling like a storyteller?
Mm, well, I started writing when I was 13 because I had a bad experience in my fifth grade classroom. I had just arrived in the United States and I didn't speak a word of English. And my school had a writing competition. So all the students had to write a story, and I wrote mine in Spanish. But my teacher rejected my story because it was written in Spanish. And then I thought, I'm writing in the wrong language. That's what it taught me, being rejected because I wrote in Spanish, that I was writing in the wrong language, and that the only way anybody was going to pay attention to me and that I was going to have a voice was if I wrote in English. So then when I was 13, my junior high had another writing competition, and I made myself write a story in English because I wanted to be rejected on the same terms as everyone else, and I won first place. So after that, I just started writing, and I kept writing. But it wasn't until I got to community college, I went to Pasadena City College, that my English professor asked me if I had ever thought about pursuing a career as a writer. And she was the first teacher who ever told me I had writing talent. And she pushed me, and she encouraged me, and she helped me to transfer to UC Santa Cruz as a creative writing major.
I have to tell you, I went to East LA Community College, so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
delighted to hear this, by the way. But hey, do you remember at all what that story was about? The one you wrote when you were 13?
Yeah. Well, at the time, I was reading a lot of Sweet Valley High, which is
Okay.
about these twins, Elizabeth and Jessica, who are like, blonde and blue eyed and have dimples on their cheeks, and they're popular and very beautiful. So then the story that I wrote are about twins as well, Kimberly and Beverly.
Okay.
But in my story, the twins are separated, and the mother takes one twin, and the father keeps the other one. So the twins grow up being separated for many years, and when they come together, they're strangers to each other, and they don't really know how to connect, and how to be sisters. So mine was depressing. It was a depressing story, but it was also a story that was very personal to me because I had experienced separation from my younger sister. When my father brought us to the United States, he only brought me, my older sister, and my brother with him, and we had to leave my little sister behind in Mexico. And the next time I saw my little sister, I was a stranger to her, and that was very devastating for me.
Wow, that's quite a story. Do you don't have to quote it tonight. Do you still have it somewhere? Is it tucked away in a drawer? Do you
No,
know?
no, I
I'm
wish
just
I
curious.
had it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm going to run one last quote past you, and you actually kind of addressed this earlier. in a way. This is one from one of my favorite authors, James Thurber. And he said, I never quite know when I'm not writing. Sometimes my wife comes up to me at a party and says, damn it, Thurber, stop writing. She usually catches me in the middle of a paragraph. So what about you?
Well, I think my children and sometimes my husband, when I'm very grumpy, they tell me you should go write. Because they know that sometimes because I haven't had my writing yet, I'm gonna be grumpy, and so yeah, they tell me you should go write. But
And
it's true. I mean, I think we're always writing. I think with writers, no matter where we're at, we always have one foot in the real world and another foot in the world that we're creating. And that can be a struggle for our loved ones because they can sense that we're not really 100% present.
So
Yeah.
wow, I'm guessing that the beauty of this novel, the Ballad of Love and Glory, is part of it's due to your family. I'm guessing they helped you get through it. I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, yeah. And also I have to, give a shout out to my husband because he helped me out so much for the 7 years that I was working on this book. My husband has a background in theater arts, and so I'm able to talk to him about plot and structure and scene and pacing and character development and dialogue, and we can talk endlessly about this stuff. And so he listened to me on and on and on and on about
I
me
see.
talking
Yeah.
about this novel, bouncing off ideas off of him, and he also proofreads of my work. So he's very hands-on, and I really love that because I feel that he's always part of my writing, that it's
Mhm.
not separate from our relationship because he is a part of it.
I see. I see. Before I ask you my last question, I'm going to throw in a real quick one here. Um, this may sound wacky, but when you were writing your scenes involving the Mexican characters, and particularly the dialogue, did you find you were thinking of the dialogue in Spanish or thinking of it in English?
Yeah, I was trying to capture a little bit of how my characters would sound in Spanish, even though I'm writing in English. I wanted it to kind of, wanted you to kind of hear that rhythm of the sentences in Spanish. And I was very particular in terms of what the vocabulary that I used. And there
Mhm.
were times when I wanted to use words, for example, that have the same meaning in English and in Spanish. So I
Mhm.
wanted to bring in some of those words as well, or also bring in words that are common in Spanish, not so much in English, but that you understand them. Like, for example, the word like palpitates, like when
Mhm.
Santana says, my heart palpitates with joy instead of it beats with joy, or,
Right.
because in Spanish is mi corazón palpita. So I
Mhm.
used that verb, palpitate.
Well, the reason I ask is because although occasionally you throw in a Spanish word, and then of course there's also little sprinklings of Irish Gaelic in there too.
Mhm.
When the Mexican characters are speaking, even though it's all written in English, I could tell they're speaking Spanish. So
Mhm.
somehow you pull that off. It's magic.
Thank
So
you.
the last question from me is: so what's the next project? What's next for you?
Oh, well, I hope my readers are happy to hear that I have another book coming out this year in June. June
Mm,
7,
good.
I'm publishing a anthology that I co-edited with poet Sonia Winyansaka, who's also from Los Angeles. This is an anthology called Somewhere We Are Human, Authentic Voices on Migration, Survival, and New Beginnings. And it's an anthology by and about undocumented or formerly undocumented Americans.
Wow. So 2 in 1 year. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Reyna, so much. I think we're going to bring back Donna right now. We got a lot of questions from readers, some of which you've already been able to answer tonight, but we have more. Donna, can you join us in a sec? There she is.
Hi there. Thank you both. That was just so interesting. And before we get to the reader questions, I wanted to mention that we have the song, the ballad. Amy on the social team, Amy Wong on the social team has been tweeting it at LA Times on Twitter. So if anyone is looking for it, just go to Twitter. And she's also been live tweeting our event as well. So all of stories related, the music, everything we've been talking about, she's been sharing with our readers live. So the music was really great. And we'll hear a little bit more at the end of the program. So now to our reader questions. We had quite a few. Our first one comes from Michael Armstrong. And he says, I'm writing my master's on American descent to the war. Do you have any primary sources you found especially useful in your research?
Well, there are several books that I found useful. I mean, they're, the books about the Mexican American War itself. And then there were books that I read about John Riley specifically, and I mentioned them in my author's note, like the Rogue's March, the Shamrock and Sword, and the Irish Heroes of Mexico were books that were really helpful to me. But I also read a lot of diaries and letters written by US soldiers. And those were particularly helpful too, in terms of being able to get insight into what Army life was like and the politics of the time. But then there are also other books that are, about James Polk, for example. Like if you read that, there's a book that I liked called A Wicked War. That one was also very helpful. And then I read a lot of books too about the Texas Rebellion, because the Mexican American War, a big reason of why it happened was because of the Texas Rebellion. So then I had to read up on that as well and get a really good handle on what happened leading up to the war.
So aside from all of the research you did with books, which you've mentioned, from the photos that you shared, you also did quite a bit of travel. That wasn't one of the reader questions, but I think people would be interested. Can you tell us a little bit about the travels, the places you went to piece together and create the scenes and the places?
Yeah, well, I mean, I spoke earlier about going to Mexico, to some of the places that were important in the book. Like I went to the Castillo de Chapultepec. I went to the convent, the Churubusco convent, where the San Patricios were captured. I went to Veracruz, to Santa Ana's house, which is now a museum. And I went to the Plaza San Jacinto, and of course, the historic center of Mexico City, to look at a Palacio Nacional and the Catedral Metropolitana, the Zócalo, which used to be called the Plaza de Constitución. So I immersed myself as much as I could in that. I also went down to the Rio Grande area. I took a boat ride on the Rio Grande. I went to Brownsville, to Port Isabel, which used to be called El Frontón de Santa Isabel, which is where the novel opens, with the burning down of that village. And then I went to Ireland. I went to John Riley's hometown of Clifton in County Galway. And I just took a tour of West Ireland because I wanted to see what John Riley might have seen. And it was a really beautiful experience, because as I was writing about John Riley, one of the things that I write a lot about is his yearning for his homeland, which is a very universal yearning for immigrants. We're always yearning for our homeland. But of course, I wanted to capture John Riley's homeland. I wanted to know what it looked like, what it smelled like, what it felt like to be there. And so that trip to Ireland was also very special.
When you were in Ireland, may I ask a quick question? When you were in Ireland, did you tell anyone what you were working on, and what was their reaction?
Yeah. In Clifton, I met several of the locals that knew about John Riley and about the St. Patrick's Battalion, and they all got excited about hearing about the book. And I actually gave the manuscript to a local historian there from Clifton, who read the book, and I asked him. And at that point, I was pretty much done with it. So I just asked him to give it a quick read and let me know if there was anything that I needed to fix. And he read it and he emailed me and he said, "I love this book." So he had nothing that I needed to change. But I did work with another historian, Carol Smith. He read the manuscript twice, and he was the one who helped me to add the Irish Gaelic in there. He helped me to. We used to like talk a lot about the Irish history because I would tell him that I really wanted John Riley. When he was in Mexico, to constantly be aware of the commonalities and differences between Ireland and Mexico. So we talked about the history and some of the things that Riley would be able to pick up on, like that scene, for example, where the Texas Rangers are desecrating the Catholic Church in Monterrey. John Riley right away thinks about when Oliver Cromwell came to Ireland and also desecrated the Catholic churches in Ireland. So I was constantly trying to make those connections.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Chris Springer, and it's one of several questions we have about your writing process. And she asks, how do you write? Do you create a timeline, an outline of your story? Do you know the end before you start, like John Irving does? Do you start with the characters?
Well, I think each book requires a different approach. Sometimes I start a book and I have absolutely no idea what it's about, except that there's a character that has grabbed me and I want to learn more about this character. Sometimes I start with an emotion. And other times I just kind of dive in there and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I figure it out eventually. And with this novel, with the Ballad of Love and Glory, I did have to make a rough outline because it's a historical novel. And I was working with the actual historical timeline, of the war itself or the invasion, right? We should call it an invasion because that's what it was. So the invasion lasted from March of 1846 all the way to June of 1848. So I knew I was working with that timeline and I had to figure out how to fit my own story within the historical timeline. And I didn't want to mess around with it at all because I wanted to be accurate. I wanted my reader to know that I did not take any liberties with the story and I was not manipulating the events just so that they could fit into my plot line. So I fit my plot into the historical timeline. And the only time I went out of that was in the very last chapter. So other than that, it's pretty accurate the way that the events unfolded.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Gloria C. And she actually wrote us quite a long note to you, which I'll share. But basically, she had to read The Distance Between Us for one of her classes at Scripps College. And you came to her class, you spoke about your book, and it was a time when she felt as a first generation immigrant student very out of sync with her school. And so your visit really meant a lot. And she details that in her note, that it really meant a lot having you come and speak to her class. And her question that she comes to after sharing that story is she wanted to know, where do you start when you're writing stories about people who migrate? When and how does a story about the world become a story about you and your family? So from your experience, maybe you could just share some insights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you so much. I'm so glad that, you're here able to join us. And I remember my visit to Scripps College very fondly. So the question, where do you start? I definitely, I think every book has required a different start for me. And like, for example, my first book, Across 100 Mountains, was some loosely autobiographical novel, but I the way I started that novel was really exploring my fear that I had as a child, that what if my father had never come back for me? So I started with that question. And then that novel became an exploration of that question of what if my father had never come back for me? And that's the novel I wrote, not so much about the life I lived, but the life I might have lived if circumstances had been different. And then with the distance between us, I wanted to really capture the experience of what it was like to be left behind in Mexico. Because a lot of times when we talk about immigrants, we always talk about them once they set foot in the border, and then they come here, and we talk about, their struggles that they face once they're here in this country. But I wanted to capture what it's like before we even come, before we even arrive at the border. And so half of the distance between us takes place in Mexico. And I explore family separation. I talk about my parents leaving me and my siblings behind when they immigrated to Los Angeles, and about the trauma that we endured during that separation of almost 8 years. And then coming to Los Angeles to discover that my father was a complete stranger to me, and the family dynamics were just so complicated after that separation and that reunification. So then, in A Dream Called Home, for example, I was writing about my immigrant experience, but I was also trying to write about my coming of age in California and becoming the first person in my family to set foot in a university. So, in addition to my immigrant experience, I captured the experience of being a first generation university student. And I also write about my dream of becoming a published writer one day.
Thank you. Our final reader question comes from Jennifer Hinnon, and she asks, what early childhood or middle school books influenced you as a reader and then a writer?
Okay, so, well, I mean, I mentioned earlier how I was reading a lot of Sweet Valley High and Babysitter's Club, and I always felt like an outsider in those books because I knew that those twins, in Sweet Valley High, I could never be their friend in real life. They would never befriend a person like me, and so I often felt like an outsider in literature. The only books that I read that I connected to when I was a teenager were books by V.C. Andrews. And yeah, she was writing about, white characters as well. But V.C. Andrews would write very miserable experience, the miserable experiences of white kids. And I connected to those stories because she would write about kids living in poverty. The Flowers in the Attic, was a story about the siblings who are trapped in their grandmother's attic and they're being poisoned. And they have an evil grandmother, and they have a mother who leaves them. So I connected to that, and I realized that, oh, my I had a miserable childhood, but at least my grandmother wasn't poisoning me. So, so those were some of the books that I related to when I was in junior high school.
Well, so let's fast forward to your reading now. One of the things we always like to talk about here at our LA Times Book Club is what other books that we're enjoying beside our featured books. So I wanted to just put this, I'll start with Reyna, but then I'd also like to ask Steve this. What is the last book that kept you up at night that you really enjoyed and that you would recommend to other readers? Reyna?
Yeah, well, I want to recommend Julissa Arce's new book that just came out March 22nd. So it's a brand new book. You Sound Like a White Girl: The Case for Rejecting Assimilation. And Julissa Arce is from she lives in Los Angeles, so she's an LA-based writer. And her book, You Sound Like a White Girl, is just a very powerful book about why we should reject assimilation and why we should strive to retain our cultural identity.
Thank you. And actually, she'll be at the Festival of Books next month. So
That's right.
she'll be one of the featured authors. Steve, how about you? What's been keeping you up at night?
Well, because of I haven't seen the movie version, but because of I've read the reviews of for Macbeth, I went back to Macbeth, and this Shakespeare guy, he's pretty good. He's going to make it. It's just really pretty good. But one thing I'm doing in preparation of the book festival for next month is I just started reading this, Dear Los Angeles, which is the city in diaries and letters. You'll love this. 1542 to 2018. It's a collection of letters about LA, and I'm going to be moderating a panel with authors who've written books about California. So I've just cracked that, and I've got a whole stack of books I'm going to be working through in advance of the festival. And Reyna, you're going to be there, right? Too?
That's right. That's right. I'm going to be in the historical fiction panel.
That sounds wonderful. Moderated by Amy Liu. That sounds like a wonderful panel. She's a terrific LA writer as well. Well, speaking of the festival, I wanted to share a few quick updates for our April book. Our April author is going to be a poet, Amanda Gorman, and she'll be joining book club readers at the Festival of Books on April 23rd, talking about her new collection, Call Us What We Carry, and she'll be in conversation with Orange County poet laureate Natalie Graham, who's a previous book club guest as well. And of course, the entire festival lineup is online at latimes.com/Festival of Books. So you can start browsing and plan your visits. And of course, both Steve and Reyna and I'll be there as well. So it'd be nice to meet more of our book club readers in person. And a final note I wanted to mention is that since the start of the pandemic, we have offered so many of our live journalism events and book club events for free and virtual to really make it easy for readers to participate from home. And I want to thank all of our book club readers who jumped in to support our new LA Times Community Fund, which is going to be supporting our community book club going forward. And we've already had readers who have signed on as sponsors. And I just want to, we're so grateful for your support. We're just getting started with our community fund, and we want to expand our community conversations. And we just really need your help to keep going and growing, but we're off to a great start. And as we wrap up this evening, I want to give both of our guests the last word and just invite you to share a final comment. Steve, any final comments, parting words?
All I could say is I just think for the aspiring writers out there that Reyna is a just excellent example about how you use your own experiences to as a leaping off point to explore and write things. And if there are any particularly young writers out there and you're thinking, well, what do I got to write about? Look inward and then use that as the seed, as Reyna was saying, to come up with something new.
And one thing I neglected to mention at the start of book club night, for those of you who aren't familiar with Steve Padilla, he's the editor of our Column 1 feature, which is really typically the most beautifully written story in the newspaper most days. And he's just a master of words and storytelling. So for people who are aspiring writers, it's something people on staff always enjoy the opportunity to work with Steve. Those stories get a lot of care and attention. And they're also just always a wonderful read. So I wanted to
read Column 1, folks. Read Column 1.
Read Column 1. It's terrific. Final comment from Reyna. Is there anything we didn't ask you or anything you'd like to share this evening?
No, I mean, I just want to thank you for hosting me tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for reading my book. And I really hope that we can continue to read more stories that offer new perspectives on our history, and that we continue to ask ourselves, what don't we know about our history, and what should we be learning about our history?
Well, thank you, Steve Padilla. Thank you, Reyna Grande. And thank you to
Donna.
all of our readers for
Steve.
joining us tonight. Good night, everyone.
Good night. It's been a pleasure, Reyna. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
was born a son of Erin, with no Irish luck or rank, forced away from County Galway to the Rio Grande banks. There I hoped to prove my mettle